On November 2nd, 2011, in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, police apprehended a suspect in the desecration of several graves in the area. They immediately sent 8 officers to the house of Anatoly Moskvin, a journalist, a professor, and an apparent grave robber. This is where officers made a gruesome discovery. Anatoly was the proud owner of 29 human dolls that were made from the mummified corpses of stolen children. Hi, my name is Tasha Nicole, and this is my series White Rabbit, where we deep dive into anything spooky, odd, or just interesting while I apply some special effects makeup. Today we will be talking about the absolutely horrid story of Anatoly Moskvin, a human doll maker collector, and I will be turning myself into a doll. This story was a recommendation of one of you, so thank you so much, Jasmine. I stopped dead in my tracks on the story that I was doing to do this one because it's crazy. Please remember to like this video and subscribe if you like this type of content so that I can tell you some more stories. But right now we're gonna jump into this one. Anatoly Moskvin was born September 1st, 1966 to his parents Yuri and Elvira. He was his parents' only child and he was essentially a genius. He wasn't the most popular kid in school, but he was definitely the smartest. Even as a young child, Anatoly really loved to read, but he wasn't reading like storybooks. He liked to read textbooks. So because of his really advanced intelligence, he found it really hard to make friends. His relationship with his classmates would just never really thrive. So he mostly just isolated himself and read a lot of books. And Anatoly's parents weren't necessarily worried because he seemed to be a really happy child. He was just a loner. Unfortunately, his happy-go-lucky childhood only lasted until the age of 13 because that was the year that Anatoly was introduced to something that would eventually ruin his life. The beginning of this story is a little unclear just because different reports said different things. One said that he was collecting recycling, another said that he was on his way home from school, and some said that he was literally just like abducted. What we do know is that he stumbled upon a particular house that had some strange things happening in there. There were men in suits and they were circling around this dead girl. The men were chanting something. Anatoly was really transfixed on this dead girl because he knew her. Well, he knew of her story. Anatoly had stumbled upon the funeral of 11-year-old Natasha Petrova. Natasha was this little girl that died in this freak accident. Her family's home was being remodeled and someone left a wire exposed in the bathroom. One day, Natasha was finishing up a bath and she got out of the bathtub and stepped onto this exposed wire. She was electrocuted. It killed her. Anatoly was noticed by the men at this funeral and he was forcefully grabbed and dragged into the funeral, into the room where Natasha's body was. Natasha's mother was screaming for him to come here, come here. Anatoly was trying to run, but this group of men overpowered him and dragged him in there. Reportedly, one of these men grabbed the back of Anatoly's neck and forced him to kiss Natasha's dead body. Then the grieving mother placed a ring on Anatoly's hand and told him, "You are now married." I don't know if Natasha's mother was desperately trying to give her daughter in death what she would never experience in life. She forced Anatoly into this marriage that he thought was very real with her dead daughter. That event set off a domino effect in Anatoly and he was never the same after that. When Anatoly recalled the day that he married Natasha, he says that he was forced to kiss her, but then he chose to kiss her again and again, and he just accepted in his mind that he was married. This moment really traumatized him, and the way that it manifested was into this obsession with the dead. Anatoly said that his marriage to Natasha really led him to believe in magic and communicating with the dead, and that is when he started to spend a lot of time in graveyards. Specifically her burial site. He would visit his wife almost every day. But he wouldn't only visit her, he would visit other people too. Anatoly would sit with the dead, he would read to them, he would hold ceremonies to try to communicate with them. I don't think his habit of wandering cemeteries and graveyards, is there a difference? I don't think so. I don't know if his habit in itself is weird, because I really think that cemeteries are beautiful, and I've been known to wander a few myself. I just always found them so beautiful. I never found them scary, even as a child. But Anatoly wasn't just admiring the beauty of these graveyards. He was obsessed with being near the dead, and he was really obsessed with being as close as he possibly could to Natasha. And because he was spending his days obsessing over her and his nights at the graveyard with her, Natasha started to visit him in his dreams. Well, they were really nightmares. Anatoly was having these really vivid nightmares about Natasha for over a year before he finally broke down and told his parents what was going on. He told them that he 100% believed that he was haunted, and they were terrified, so they immediately took him to see a doctor. That turned out to be pointless, because the doctor basically told them that he was a normal boy going through puberty. Which is seeing ghosts a part of puberty? Because I don't know. He's explaining away visions, haunting, and obsession with the dead by puberty. After Anatoly returned home, his obsession with the dead did continue, but his dreams about Natasha did eventually go away. Anatoly really poured himself into his studies, and he was insanely intelligent. He ended up going to the University of Moscow, where he became a historian and mastered 13 languages. Can you imagine? I've been trying to learn Spanish since high school. He knows 13. Anatoly became a published scholar and a journalist. He had like some major credentials. He even published a weekly column, and he had a 2-part documentary series. These were based on his walks through the cemetery and what he experienced there. Anatoly was so completely devoted to his work and obsessed with the dead that he actually spent the night in someone's coffin ahead of their burial. It's like, how disrespectful can you be? I would be so upset if that was a family member or a loved one of mine and someone slept in their coffin. Eventually, Anatoly ended up getting this really big job. He was hired by a university to document every single person that was in several graveyards across Russia. Because of all of the articles and documentaries that Anatoly was publishing, he had to travel a lot. He said himself that he ended up visiting over 752 different cemeteries. And when I say travel, I mean walk. This man would walk over 20 miles every single day just to go to different cemeteries and take these super meticulous notes and create all these publications that were really important to him. And we can't forget spending time trying to communicate with the dead. He even began sleeping in these cemeteries. It got so bad that he was run out of several cemeteries and towns because people were so upset and weirded out about him spending so much time trying to conjure up their loved ones. I mean, just imagine going to visit like one of your family members and there's an actual human sleeping on top of their grave or trying to communicate with them. Because of all this heat Anatoly was catching and he kept getting kicked out of cemeteries, he ended up moving back home with his parents. That's when his parents noticed he had another obsession. Anatoly really wanted a daughter. He had tried to adopt before, but he was denied because of his lack of home, lack of steady income. I mean, Anatoly was sleeping in graveyards and drinking out of puddles. I don't know how you thought they were going to let you adopt. So since he was back home, he asked his parents if they would support him in adopting a daughter. He figured maybe he could get around that initial denial now that he was living with supportive parents. But his parents were like, absolutely not. There was no way he could financially support a child, let alone be mentally and emotionally stable enough to raise that child. And Anatoly was really upset, but they were not budging. They were always a little bit worried about Anatoly. They were worried about him and a lot of his strange hobbies. And they really didn't like how he was hyper fixated on having a little girl. Anatoly played his cards really well, and he pretended to just accept this decision from his parents. But the only reason he did that was because he had a plan. It was a sick plan, but it was a plan to get a daughter. So Anatoly's parents only stayed in their house about 6 months out of the year. The other 6 months of every year, they always traveled. Goals. So the next time they left for their travels, Anatoly put his plan into action. So the big day was in May of 2003. Anatoly traveled to his favorite graveyard in the dead of night, and he selected the grave of a little girl. I don't know her exact age, but she was a child, and Anatoly dug up her coffin. Once the coffin was exposed, Anatoly cut a hole in the top and he removed her body. Then he breaks out some mummification supplies. Yeah, he has gone off the deep end. I'm not gonna go super in depth into what he did to mummify this body because honestly it makes me a little sick. But this process took several weeks. He would rebury her before morning every single night and then come back the next day, dig her up again, continue the mummification process, bury her again. Even after she was mummified to his satisfaction, he kept doing this same process for months because this is how he was spending time with her. But obviously that's not a long-term solution because after a few months, his body had had it, digging up a grave every single night. Anatoly decided two things. Number one, he needed a smaller, fresher body. And number two, he was going to take this one home. And that's exactly what he did. After the mummification of this second body, I mean, it's just rinse and repeat. He did this same exact process with several other bodies. Obviously, Anatoly cannot have all these corpses just lying around his house because his parents would eventually come home. So he had another idea. When Anatoly was a little boy, he used to collect dolls. So he thought if he could just make these children's bodies look like dolls, that would be believable to his parents. Then he could have his daughters near him all the time without his parents being suspicious. He had to do some things to the bodies to get them to seem more doll-like. He put clothes on them. He stuffed clothes inside them so they wouldn't lose their shape or form. He also added wax faces on top of their actual faces so that he could add makeup, blush, nail polish for lipstick. Now this is really a fact that I wish I didn't know, and I'm going to share with you. In some of the bodies, he put voice boxes or music boxes so that when you squeeze them, they would talk or sing. Ew. It's like when you think it can't get any worse. His parents eventually did come home and they noticed his reignited flame with the dolls. They actually hated this hobby. They thought that the dolls looked so creepy and so spooky, but they also knew that their son was lonely and they figured that he was just creating companionship. His parents did start to become concerned when Anatoly would sit around with all of the dolls and watch cartoons with them. He would have birthday parties for them, and everyone was required to gather around and sing happy birthday to the doll. How do y'all not know you're eating cake with corpses? I want to revisit the pictures for a second. He would have had to move out. Through this time that Anatoly was stealing human remains, he would still go to the original grave sites and leave things there. He would leave gifts and letters. He would wish them happy birthday. The families were complaining, but the police had no lead. That was until 2009 when Anatoly became a blogger. He blogged about the same things that he wrote about, and this reminded everyone that he was an expert on cemeteries. So the police went to visit him to ask for help. You know, just to see if he's ever seen anything strange, some people lurking. Anatoly was immediately pissed and he refused to help whatsoever. And even though there was nothing that the officers could do, they did think that it was really strange. The whole case of the grave disturber got put on the back burner because no one one knew at this time that he was taking bodies. The case began to pick up steam again when there were some terrorist attacks in Moscow. Because of the terrorist attack, there started to be a lot of attacks on Muslims that lived there, and people were taking it as far as to desecrate their graves. They were breaking headstones, spray painting them, just being disgusting. So the police were back on the case thinking maybe this was related to the grave lurker from before. It had been like 2 years since then. So the police decided to set up this sting operation at one of the cemeteries that was consistently being vandalized. And long story short, Anatoly was there being a public fucking nuisance. Imagine being like 45 and doing this, but he was. The police ended up going to Anatoly's parents' house to gather more evidence about the vandalism. And when they arrived, the first thing they noticed was the smell. I mean, he's got 29 corpses in the house. Like, how did the parents not know this? The police noticed the smell. When they finally got inside, not only were they entering this really gross hoarder-like situation, but they found 29 mummified bodies inside the house. They also found detailed notes about what he did to each set of remains. They found a notepad with all of the different backstories of the girls. He had written them lives. He had maps of the cemeteries he stole them from. He had pictures. Honestly, he had all the evidence they could ever need on a silver platter handed to them. And if that wasn't enough, they matched his footprints to footprints found outside some of the grave sites. Anatoly confessed to 44 counts of desecrating graves in May of 2012. Not so fun fact, he refused to apologize to any of the families. He accused the families of abandoning their children. He actually said to them, "You left them out in the cold. I brought them in and I warmed them up." He even warned them that if they were to rebury the bodies, whenever he got out, he would find them and he would take them again. Anatoly was deemed unfit to stand trial after he had his mental health evaluation. He was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic and he was sentenced to be held indefinitely at a psychiatric facility. In 2022, the psychiatric unit where Anatoly was being held came out with a statement saying that there was no reason for Anatoly to be held there any longer and that technically he could be released at any time. This is such an intense story for me. I guess I can understand the thought process of him not being a danger to himself or others. Anatoly has said so many times the only reason he did this was because he was lonely. It's been like at least 13 years now, so it's possible for him to have worked through his issues. Anatoly has said that he just wants to be free. He wants to marry his girlfriend, settle down, and become a foreign language tutor. But the families must be terrified because he did threaten to dig up their loved ones again. Now, of course, since then, he has said that he would never. But do we ever really know? I mean, of course he would say that if he is actively trying to be released. Please drop your thoughts and your comments below. I really want to hear what you guys think about this story. The doll makeup tutorial will be out next week, so stay tuned for that. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you down another rabbit hole.